The rain was falling hard outside when David stepped into Mel's diner that Tuesday night. It was exactly 11 o'clock, just like every other Tuesday for the past 3 years. The bell above the door made its usual sound as he walked in, and the warm smell of coffee and home-cooked food hit him right away. David was not your typical late-night diner customer. At 52 years old, he wore expensive suits that probably cost more than most people made in a month. His watch was the kind you see in fancy magazines, and his car parked outside was worth more than most houses. But despite all his wealth, David looked tired, the kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. He walked straight to his usual spot in the back corner booth. It was the same table every single time. The red leather seat was worn and cracked, and the table had coffee rings on it from years of use. But David liked it here because he could see the whole diner while keeping his back to the wall. Old habits from his business days, he told himself. The regular night waitress, Betty, usually worked Tuesday nights. She was a sweet woman in her 60s who knew to bring David black coffee and a slice of apple pie without him even asking. But tonight was different. Instead of Betty's familiar face, a young woman approached his table. She looked to be in her early 20s, with long, dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her uniform was the standard diner outfit, but she had paint stains on her fingers and what looked like charcoal smudges on her sleeve. She carried herself with a certain grace, despite the heavy coffee pot in one hand and a worn leather bag slung over her shoulder. "Good evening," she said with a genuine smile that caught David off guard. "I'm Amy, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Betty had to leave early for a family emergency." David just nodded. He wasn't much for conversation these days. "Black, coffee and apple pie," he said quietly. "Coming right up," Amy replied, but she didn't leave immediately. "Is that our homemade apple pie? Because I have to warn you, I tried a piece earlier and it's dangerous. I almost ate the whole thing." Despite himself, David felt the corner of his mouth twitch. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was more expression than he'd shown in months. "Yes, the homemade one." As Amy walked away to get his order, David noticed something different about her. Unlike most people who worked the late shift at diners, she didn't look defeated or tired. There was something bright about her, something that reminded him of no. He pushed that thought away before it could fully form. When Amy returned with his coffee, her leather bag slipped from her shoulder and hit the floor. Papers and art, supplies scattered everywhere. "Oh no," she said, quickly kneeling to gather everything up. "I'm so sorry about this." David found himself getting up to help her collect the fallen items. As he reached for a pencil that had rolled under the table, he saw something that made his heart stop completely. It was a sketch pad, fallen open to a drawing that took his breath away. The page showed a little girl with pigtails, sitting by a pond and feeding ducks. The girl was drawn with such care and detail that she seemed almost real. But what shocked David most was how familiar the drawing style looked. The way the ducks were drawn with oversized beaks and friendly eyes. The way the little girl's hair was sketched with flowing lines. Even the way the water was drawn with gentle ripples. "Sorry about the mess," Amy said, quickly closing the sketch pad and stuffing it back into her bag. "I'm an art student, and I tend to carry my whole life around with me." David couldn't speak. He stood there frozen, holding a pencil in his hand, staring at the spot where the drawing had been just seconds before. His mind was racing with memories he'd spent years trying to forget. "Sir? Are you okay?" Amy's voice seemed to come from far away. David blinked and realized he was still standing there like a statue. "Yes, I'm fine." He handed her the pencil and sat back down, his hands shaking slightly as he reached for his coffee cup. Amy noticed his reaction but didn't say anything. She was the type of person who could read people well, and she could see that something about her artwork had affected this quiet man deeply. Instead of asking questions, she simply placed his pie on the table and refilled his coffee cup. "The apple pie really is good," she said gently. "And if you need anything else, just wave me over." As Amy walked away to help other customers, David sat in his booth trying to make sense of what he'd just seen. The drawing couldn't be what he thought it was. It was impossible. But the image was burned into his mind now, and it was bringing back memories he'd worked so hard to bury. He took a sip of coffee and tried to focus on the present. The diner was quiet tonight, with just a few other customers scattered around. There was an old man reading a newspaper at the counter, a young couple sharing a milkshake in a booth near the window, and a truck driver eating a late dinner at a table by himself. This was why David came here. In his world of boardrooms and business deals, everyone wanted something from him. Everyone had an angle, a request, a reason to get close to him. But here at Mel's Diner, he was just another customer. Nobody knew who he really was or how much money he had. He could sit in peace and remember what it felt like to be normal, but tonight felt different. Tonight, a young waitress with paint-stained fingers had accidentally shown him something that turned his whole world upside down. David watched Amy as she moved around the diner. She talked easily with the other customers, laughing at the truck, driver's jokes, and checking on the elderly man's coffee. When she had a quiet moment, she pulled out her sketch pad and drew quick pictures of the people around her. David could see her capturing the truck driver's weathered hands, the way the couple leaned toward each other, the peaceful expression on the old man's face. She drew the way someone draws when they truly love it. Not for money or recognition, but because they had to. Because something inside them needed to create, to capture moments and feelings on paper. David finished his pie and coffee, but he didn't get up to leave like he usually did. Instead, he sat there watching Amy work and wondering about the drawing he'd seen. Was it just his imagination playing tricks on him? Had grief finally made him lose his mind? When Amy came by to refill his cup again, David almost asked her about the drawing. The words were right there on his tongue, but something held him back. Maybe it was fear of what her answer might be. Maybe it was the knowledge that once he opened that door, there would be no going back. So instead, he left money on the table that included a tip much larger than normal and walked out into the rainy night. But as he sat in his expensive car in the parking lot, David knew one thing for certain. He would be back. And next time, he would find the courage to ask Amy about her art. The drawing haunted him all the way home, bringing back memories of another little girl who used to draw pictures just like that one. David couldn't sleep that night. He lay in his king-sized bed staring at the ceiling, but all he could see was that drawing. The little girl with pigtails feeding ducks by a pond. Every time he closed his eyes, the image came back stronger than before. At 3 a.m, he gave up trying to sleep. David got out of bed and walked through his massive house in the dark. The mansion had 12 bedrooms, but he only used one. Most of the rooms stayed empty, like a museum that nobody visited. His footsteps echoed in the hallway as he made his way to his home office. The office was the only room in the house that felt real to him. It had his desk, his computer, and shelves full of business books. But hidden in the bottom drawer of his desk was something he hadn't looked at in months. Something he kept locked away because it hurt too much to see. David sat down in his leather chair and pulled out a small key from his wallet. His hands were shaking as he unlocked the bottom drawer. Inside was a wooden box that his wife had bought years ago. She had painted little flowers on it and written Lily's art in careful letters on the top. He lifted the box onto his desk like it was made of glass. For a moment, he just sat there looking at it. Opening this box always felt like opening a door to the past, a door to a time when his life had meaning beyond making money and attending meetings. David took a deep breath and opened the lid. Inside were dozens of drawings, all created by his 7-year-old daughter before she died 4 years ago. The papers were yellowed now, and some of the crayon marks had faded, but each picture was still perfect in his eyes. He pulled out the drawings one by one and spread them across his desk. There were pictures of their family dog wearing a tiny crown that Lily had insisted on putting on him. There were drawings of their old house with flowers in the garden and birds in the sky. There were pictures of birthday parties and Christmas, morning and lazy Sunday afternoons. But as David looked through the drawings, his heart started beating faster. Because mixed in with all the other pictures were dozens of drawings that looked exactly like what he'd seen in Amy's sketchpad. Little girls feeding ducks by a pond. The same style, the same innocent way of drawing that made everything look happy and magical. David picked up one of Lily's drawings and held it under his desk lamp. In the picture, a little girl with pigtails was sitting by water, throwing breadcrumbs to a group of ducks. The ducks had the same oversized beaks and friendly expressions that he'd seen in Amy's drawing. Even the way the water was drawn looked identical. He found another drawing, and another. Lily had drawn this same scene over and over again in the months before the accident. David remembered asking her about it at the time. She would always smile and say she was drawing herself with the duck lady. When he asked who the duck lady was, Lily would just giggle and say it was a secret. David's wife, Helen, used to worry about these drawings. She thought it was strange that Lily was so obsessed with this one scene, but David had just figured it was a phase, like when she went through her dinosaur period, or when she wanted to be a ballerina. Now, sitting alone in his office at 3 in the morning, David realized he had never really listened to what Lily was trying to tell him. She had talked about the duck lady like she was a real person, someone who taught her how to draw animals and told her stories about magical places. David picked up a drawing that Lily had made just weeks before the accident. In this one, the little girl by the pond was holding hands with an older girl who looked to be in her 20s. The older girl had long dark hair just like Amy. At the bottom of the page, in Lily's careful 7-year-old handwriting, were the words, "Me and the duck lady." His hands started shaking so badly that he almost dropped the paper. This couldn't be happening. It was impossible. Amy couldn't be more than 25 years old now, which meant she would have been around 21 when Lily drew this picture. But how could Lily have drawn someone she'd never met? Someone who wouldn't come into David's life for another 4 years? David stood up from his desk and walked to the window. Outside, the city was quiet and dark. A few cars moved along the distant highway, their headlights like small stars in the darkness. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass and tried to make sense of what he was seeing. The accident had happened on a rainy Tuesday night, just like tonight. David had been working late again, missing another family dinner. Helen had taken Lily to her grandmother's house for the evening. They were driving home when a drunk driver ran a red light and hit their car head-on. Both Helen and Lily died instantly. David had blamed himself every day since then. If he had come home for dinner like he'd promised, they wouldn't have been on that road at that time. If he had been a better husband and father, if he had put his family before his work, they would still be alive. After the funeral, David had sold their family home because he couldn't stand to be there without them. He bought this big empty mansion and threw himself into his work even harder than before. He made more money than ever, but none of it mattered. Money couldn't bring back the sound of Lily's laughter or the way Helen hummed while she cooked dinner. 4 years David had been living like a ghost. He went through the motions of being alive, but inside he felt dead. The only time he felt anything close to normal was during his Tuesday night visits to Mel's diner, where he could sit quietly and remember what it was like to be around regular people living regular lives. But now everything was different. Seeing Amy's drawing had cracked something open inside him, something he'd kept sealed shut for years. It was like Lily was trying to tell him something from wherever she was now. David went back to his desk and looked at the drawings again. He noticed details he'd missed before. In one picture, Lily had drawn herself wearing a pink dress with a butterfly pin, her favorite outfit. In Amy's drawing, the little girl was wearing the exact same dress with the exact same pin. In another of Lily's drawings, the ducks were arranged in a specific pattern around the pond, with one large duck in the center and smaller ones forming a circle around it. David remembered Amy's drawing having the same arrangement. These weren't just similar drawings. They were identical in ways that couldn't be explained by coincidence. It was like Amy had been looking at Lily's pictures when she drew her own, but that was impossible. David had never shown these drawings to anyone. They had been locked in his desk drawer since the day after the funeral. As the sun started to rise outside his window, David made a decision. He had to see Amy again. He had to find out how she could possibly know these things about his daughter. Even if it meant looking crazy, even if it meant opening wounds that had taken years to heal, he had to know the truth. David carefully put Lily's drawings back in their box, but he kept one out. The picture of Lily with the duck lady. He folded it gently and put it in his wallet next to the photo he always carried of his wife and daughter. Tomorrow was Wednesday, not his usual Tuesday night at the diner. But David knew he couldn't wait a whole week to get answers. He would go back tonight and find a way to talk to Amy about her art. Whatever the explanation was, he needed to hear it. David couldn't focus on work the next day. He sat in his corner office on the 40th floor, staring out at the city below, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. His assistant brought him coffee and reports to review, but the papers just sat on his desk untouched. All he could think about was getting back to the diner. By 5 o'clock, David gave up pretending to work. He told his assistant he was leaving early and drove straight to Mel's diner. It was still daylight, and the place looked different than it did during his usual late-night visits. Families with young children sat in booths, and the atmosphere was livelier and more cheerful. David felt out of place in his expensive suit among the working families, but he didn't care. He needed to see Amy again. He needed to understand what was happening to him. Amy was working the dinner shift, and David was relieved to see her familiar face. She looked surprised when she saw him walk in so early, but her smile was just as warm as it had been the night before. "Well, this is unexpected," she said as she approached his usual table. "Couldn't stay away from our famous apple pie?" David managed a small smile. "Something like that." He paused, then added, "Actually, I was hoping to see more of your artwork. What I saw last night was really impressive." Amy's face lit up with genuine excitement. "Really? You're interested in art? Most people think it's just a waste of time." She looked around the busy diner. "Let me get you some coffee first, and then maybe during my break I can show you a few more drawings." As Amy went to get his coffee, David felt his heart racing. He was actually going to see more of her artwork. Part of him was terrified of what he might find, but he couldn't turn back now. When Amy returned with his coffee, she was carrying her worn leather bag. "I have about 15 minutes before the dinner rush really starts," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "I hope you don't mind me sitting down. My feet are killing me." "Of course not," David said, though he was surprised. In 3 years of coming to this diner, no server had ever sat down with him. Amy opened her sketchpad and began showing him her work. The first few drawings were portraits of people around the city. An old man feeding pigeons in the park, children playing on a playground, a woman reading a book on a bench. Each drawing captured something special about the person, some emotion or moment that made them come alive on the paper. "You're very talented," David said, and he meant it. "How long have you been drawing?" "Pretty much my whole life," Amy replied. "But something changed about 4 years ago. I started having these incredibly vivid dreams, and when I woke up, I felt this overwhelming need to draw what I'd seen." David's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. "Dreams? I know it sounds crazy," Amy said with a laugh. "But there's this little girl who visits me in my sleep. She's the sweetest thing you've ever seen, with these adorable pigtails and the brightest smile. She teaches me things about drawing that I never learned in any art class." David set his coffee cup down carefully, afraid his shaking hands might drop it. "What kind of things does she teach you?" Amy flipped to a new page in her sketchpad. "Well, she showed me how to draw animals so they look friendly instead of scary, like this." She showed him a drawing of a group of rabbits in a garden. The rabbits had large, gentle eyes and expressions that seemed almost human. It was exactly the way Lily used to draw animals, always making them look like they could be your best friend. "She also taught me about drawing water," Amy continued, turning to another page. "She said most people draw water wrong because they try to make it look too perfect. Real water moves and changes, so you have to draw it like it's alive." The drawing showed a pond with ducks swimming around it. The water had gentle ripples and reflections that looked so real, David felt like he could reach out and touch them. It was exactly the technique Lily had used in her duck pond drawings. "Amy," David said quietly, "this little girl in your dreams, what does she look like?" Amy's expression became thoughtful and distant. "She has long brown hair that she always wears in pigtails tied with yellow ribbons. She's got these amazing green eyes that sparkle when she laughs. And she always wears this pink dress with a little butterfly pin on the collar." David felt the world spinning around him. That was Lily's exact description, down to the yellow ribbons and the butterfly pin. The pin had been a gift from her grandmother, and Lily had worn it every single day. She sounds like a special little girl, David managed to say. She is, Amy said softly. But here's the strange part. She always seems sad about something, like she's waiting for something important to happen. She talks about her daddy a lot, says he's very sad, and she wishes she could help him feel better. David gripped the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles turned white. He felt like he couldn't breathe. Amy noticed his reaction. Are you okay? You look pale. I'm fine, David lied. Tell me more about these dreams. Amy studied his face carefully. There was something about this quiet man that made her feel like she could trust him, even though she barely knew him. Well, she always wants me to draw the same thing over and over. A little girl feeding ducks by a pond. She says it's very important that I get it exactly right. Amy flipped to the page David had seen the night before. In the daylight, he could see even more details that matched Lily's drawings perfectly. The way the little girl in the picture held her head, the pattern of her dress, even the number of ducks around the pond. Everything was identical. She tells me stories while I draw, Amy continued. Stories about a man who used to read to her every night, who taught her how to ride a bicycle, who made the best pancakes in the world. She says he's forgotten how to smile, and she wants to remind him that it's okay to be happy again. Tears were forming in David's eyes, but he blinked them back. What else does she tell you? She says her name is Lily, Amy said softly, and she talks about a place where she used to live with a big backyard and a swing set. She misses it there, but she says she can't go home until her daddy stops being so sad. David couldn't hold back his emotions anymore. A single tear rolled down his cheek, which he quickly wiped away. But Amy had seen it. I'm sorry, Amy said, reaching across the table to touch his hand gently. I didn't mean to upset you. I know it all sounds crazy. Sometimes I think I'm losing my mind with these dreams. You're not losing your mind, David said quietly. Amy, I need to show you something. David pulled out his wallet and carefully removed the folded drawing he'd brought with him. He unfolded it on the table between them. It was Lily's picture of herself with the duck lady. Amy gasped and covered her mouth with her hands. In the drawing, the older girl holding the little girl's hand looked exactly like Amy. The resemblance was unmistakable. My daughter drew this 4 years ago, David said, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 weeks before she died in a car accident. Amy stared at the drawing, then looked up at David with wide eyes. Your daughter? Was her name Lily? David nodded, unable to speak. Amy's hands were shaking as she looked back at the drawing. But this is impossible. How could she have drawn me before we ever met? I was in college 4 years ago, living in a different state. There's no way. I don't know how, David said. But somehow my daughter knew you, and somehow she's been visiting you in your dreams ever since. They sat in silence for a moment, both trying to process what this meant. Around them, the diner continued its normal evening routine, but their corner booth felt like it existed in a different world entirely. Amy stared at the drawing for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. Her hands were trembling as she traced the lines with her finger, recognizing her own face drawn by a child she had never met in real life. This can't be real, she whispered, looking up at David. People don't dream about strangers and then meet them years later. Things like this don't happen in real life. David understood her shock. He had spent the entire night trying to convince himself that it was all just a coincidence. But looking at Amy now, seeing her reaction to Lily's drawing, he knew they were both experiencing something beyond normal explanation. I thought the same thing, David said gently. But Amy, look at the details. Look at how she drew your hair, your eyes, even the way you hold your head. This isn't just someone who looks like you, this is you. Amy studied the drawing more carefully. The resemblance was so exact it was frightening. The older girl in the picture had the same small scar on her chin that Amy had gotten from falling off her bike when she was 12. She had the same way of standing with one shoulder slightly higher than the other. Even her smile was drawn exactly the way Amy smiled in real life. "Tell me about your daughter," Amy said quietly. "What was she like?" David's expression softened as he thought about Lily. "She was the most amazing little girl you could imagine. Always laughing, always curious about everything. She loved to draw and paint, and she saw magic in the most ordinary things. Every day with her was an adventure." "She sounds wonderful," Amy said. "I feel like I know her from my dreams. She's exactly like that there too. Always laughing, always teaching me new things about art." David pulled out his phone and showed Amy a photo of Lily from her 7th birthday party. In the picture, Lily was wearing her favorite pink dress with the butterfly pin, grinning widely as she blew out the candles on her cake. Amy gasped. "That's her. That's exactly the little girl from my dreams, even down to the butterfly pin." She paused, then added, "David, in my dreams, she always talks about you. She says her daddy works too much and forgets to eat lunch. She says he has a scar on his hand from when he was teaching her to use tools in the garage." David looked down at his left hand, where a small scar ran across his palm. He had gotten it 2 months before the accident when he was helping Lily build a birdhouse. The saw had slipped, and Lily had been so worried about him that she had insisted on putting the bandage on herself. "She remembers that?" David asked, his voice breaking slightly. "She remembers everything," Amy said. "She talks about Saturday morning pancakes and bedtime stories. She says you used to do funny voices when you read to her, especially for the dragon characters. She misses that so much." David had to wipe his eyes. Saturday morning pancakes had been their special tradition. Lily would stand on a chair next to him at the stove, helping flip the pancakes and always making a mess with the syrup and the bedtime stories. He had created an entire world of characters with different voices just to make her laugh. "There's something else," Amy said hesitantly. "She talks about the day of the accident. She says she wasn't scared because she knew you and her mom loved her, but she's worried about you because she can see that you blame yourself." David felt like someone had punched him in the chest. "I should have been there. If I hadn't been working late again. If I had come home for dinner like I promised." "She doesn't want you to think that way," Amy interrupted gently. "In my dreams, she always says it wasn't your fault. She says accidents happen, and the most important thing is that she knew how much you loved her." They sat in silence for a moment, both processing the weight of what they were sharing. Around them, the dinner rush was starting, and Amy knew she needed to get back to work soon. But she couldn't leave this conversation unfinished. "David," Amy said carefully, "I need to tell you something else about my dreams. They're not just random visits. Lily has been preparing me for something. She's been teaching me to draw specifically, so I could show you these pictures." "What do you mean?" Amy flipped through her sketch pad to a drawing she hadn't shown him yet. It was a picture of a man sitting alone in a large empty house. The man's face was turned away, but his posture showed deep sadness and loneliness. In the corner of the drawing was a small figure of a little girl, reaching out toward the man but unable to touch him. "She made me draw this last week," Amy said. "She said it was her daddy, and that he was stuck in a place where he couldn't feel happy anymore. She wanted me to show him that she's still there, still trying to reach him." David stared at the drawing, recognizing himself immediately. The man in the picture was sitting in a chair that looked exactly like the one in his home office, surrounded by the same emptiness that filled his mansion every day. "She also made me draw this," Amy said, turning to another page. This drawing showed the same man, but he was smiling and standing in a garden full of flowers. The little girl was there too, but instead of reaching out sadly, she was pointing toward a bright sunrise in the background. "She says this is what she wants for you," Amy explained. "She wants you to remember that being happy doesn't mean forgetting her. She wants you to live the kind of life that would make her proud." David felt tears streaming down his face, but for the first time in 4 years, they weren't just tears of sadness. There was something else mixed in, a tiny spark of hope that he thought had died with his daughter. "How is this possible?" he asked. "How can she be reaching out to you from wherever she is now?" Amy shook her head. "I don't know. I'm not religious or spiritual or anything like that. I've always believed in things I could see and touch, but these dreams feel more real than my waking life sometimes. When I'm with her, it's like she's actually there. What does she say about why she chose you? She says I was the right person, to help her daddy remember how to smile again. She says I have the gift of seeing beauty in sad things and turning them into something hopeful. I never understood what she meant until now. David looked at Amy with new eyes. This young woman, who was barely older than a girl herself, had been carrying messages from his daughter for 4 years without even knowing who they were meant for. She had been guided to work at this diner, to be here on this exact night when he would see her drawings. Amy, David said, I need to show you something. Would you be willing to come with me after your shift ends? I have a house full of Lily's artwork, and I think you need to see it. Amy nodded without hesitation. Yes, I want to see everything. I feel like I've been waiting my whole life for this conversation without knowing it. Just then, the dinner. Manager called for Amy to get back to work. The dinner rush was starting and tables were filling up with hungry customers. I'll wait for you, David said. However long your shift takes, I'll be right here. As Amy stood up to return to work, she paused and looked back at David. She's going to be so happy that we finally found each other. In my last dream, she said something was about to change. I think this is what she meant. David watched Amy go back to serving tables, but everything felt different now. The impossible truth was settling into his mind, and with it came a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since the accident, David felt like he wasn't completely alone in the world. Amy's shift felt like it lasted forever. David sat in his booth for 3 hours, nursing cup after cup of coffee and watching her work. Every now and then their eyes would meet across the busy diner, and she would give him a small smile that reminded him so much of Lily's encouraging grins. When Amy finally finished cleaning her last table at 10 o'clock, David was still there waiting for her. She grabbed her art bag and walked over to him, looking nervous but excited. I can't believe I'm doing this, she said, sliding into the booth across from him. Going to a stranger's house to look at drawings. My roommate would think I've lost my mind. You can trust me, David said quietly. And after tonight, I don't think we're strangers anymore. The drive to David's house took 20 minutes. Amy followed him in her old car, which looked tiny next to his expensive sedan. As they pulled up to the mansion, Amy's mouth fell open. You live here? She asked as they walked up the long driveway. This place is huge. Too huge, David admitted. I bought it after the accident because I thought a bigger house would help me feel less empty inside, but it just made everything worse. David led Amy through the front door and into his home office. The room was warm and comfortable compared to the rest of the cold mansion. Amy could see this was where David spent most of his time. Before I show you Lily's artwork, David said, I want you to know that nobody has seen these drawings since the funeral. I've kept them locked away because looking at them hurt too much. Amy nodded, understanding the weight of what he was sharing with her. David opened the wooden box on his desk and carefully spread Lily's drawings across the surface. Amy gasped as she saw them. There were dozens of pictures, and many of them looked exactly like drawings in her own sketchpad. This is incredible, Amy whispered, picking up one of Lily's drawings of a family of rabbits. Look at this. It's exactly like something I drew last month. She pulled out her sketchpad and showed David a nearly identical picture. They spent the next hour comparing drawings. For every picture Amy had created from her dreams, there was a matching drawing by Lily. The similarities weren't just in style or subject matter, they were exact matches down to the smallest details. How many times did she draw the duck pond scene? Amy asked, looking through a stack of Lily's pictures. At least 20 times in the last 3 months before the accident, David replied. She was obsessed with it. She would draw it over and over, always trying to get it exactly right. Amy pulled out her own drawings of the duck pond. I've drawn this same scene probably 50 times in the past 4 years. Every time I dream about Lily, she makes me practice it again. As they looked through the artwork together, David began telling Amy stories about each drawing. He told her about the day Lily drew their dog wearing a crown, and how she had insisted that all dogs were really princes and princesses in disguise. He told her about the drawing of their old house and how Lily had added extra windows because she thought the house looked sad with just the regular ones. She sounds like she saw magic everywhere, Amy said. She did, David smiled, and Amy realized it was the first real smile she had seen from him. She once told me that rainbows were God's way of painting the sky when he was happy. And she believed that if you made a wish on the first star you saw at night, it would definitely come true as long as you wished for something good. Amy felt tears in her eyes. In my dreams, she still talks that way. She still sees magic in everything, even from wherever she is now. David showed Amy one more drawing, a picture Lily had made of their whole family standing in front of their old house. In the picture, they were all holding hands and smiling. At the bottom, Lily had written, "My happy family," in her careful 7-year-old handwriting. "We were happy," David said softly. "For 7 amazing years, we were the happiest family you could imagine. After the accident, I forgot that was possible. I thought happiness died with them. But Lily doesn't want you to forget," Amy said gently. "In every dream, she tells me about the happy times. She wants you to remember the joy, not just the sadness." David looked at Amy for a long moment. "Why do you think she chose you? Out of all the people in the world, why did she come to you in your dreams?" Amy thought about it carefully. "I think she knew I would understand what it feels like to lose someone important. My dad died when I was 16. I spent years being angry and sad, thinking that loving someone just meant you'd lose them eventually. But art helped me heal. Drawing helped me remember the good times instead of just the pain. So she knew you could help me do the same thing." "Maybe," Amy said. "Or maybe she just knew I would keep trying until I got the message right. You know how kids are when they really want something? They don't give up." David laughed, and the sound surprised him. Lily was definitely like that. Once she decided she wanted something, she would work on it until she got it exactly the way she wanted it. As the night went on, David and Amy talked about everything. David told her about his life before the accident, how much he had loved. Being a father, how proud he had been of his little family. Amy told him about her dreams in more detail, sharing things Lily had said about forgiveness and healing and learning to be happy again. "She has a message for you," Amy said as they were looking at the last few drawings. "She's been saving it for when we finally met. She says you need to stop punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault. She says the accident was just an accident. And she wants you to know that she and her mom are together and happy, and they're waiting for you to be happy too." David felt something inside his chest that he hadn't felt in 4 years, a loosening of the tight knot of guilt and sadness he had been carrying. "How do I do that? How do I learn to be happy again when they're not here?" "She says you start by helping other people," Amy replied. "She says you have so much love inside you, but you've been keeping it locked away. She wants you to share it with the world again." Over the following weeks, David and Amy became close friends. David learned that Amy was struggling to pay for art school, working multiple jobs just to make ends meet. Without hesitation, he offered to pay for her education. At first, Amy refused, but David convinced her that this was what Lily would want. "She brought us together for a reason," David said. "Let me help you follow your dreams." David also started volunteering at the Children's Hospital, where he and Amy created an art program for young patients. They combined Lily's drawings with Amy's new artwork to inspire kids who were going through difficult times. The program became so popular that other hospitals asked them to bring it to their facilities too. 6 months after that first night at the diner, David and Amy sat together by a pond in the memorial park David had created in Lily's honor. Amy was sketching while David read aloud from one of Lily's favorite books. The pond was full of ducks, and families came there every day to feed them and enjoy the peaceful setting. "I had another dream about her last night," Amy said, showing David her newest drawing. But this one was different. The drawing showed Lily standing in a beautiful garden, waving goodbye with a huge smile on her face. Behind her, David could see the figures of a woman who looked like his wife Helen, and they were both surrounded by golden light. "She says she doesn't need to visit my dreams anymore," Amy explained. She says her daddy learned how to smile again, and now she can rest peacefully knowing you're going to be okay. David looked at the drawing and felt his heart fill with gratitude instead of sadness. His little girl had found a way to reach across the impossible distance between life and death to help him heal. Through Amy's gift and their incredible connection, Lily had given him the greatest gift of all, permission to live and love again. As the sun set over the memorial pond, David realized that grief didn't have to mean the end of joy. Love didn't disappear when someone died. It just changed form, like water becoming a cloud, still there but transformed into something new and beautiful. And somewhere in the space between dreams and reality, a little girl with pigtails and a butterfly pin was finally at peace, knowing her daddy had learned to see magic in the world again.